So welcome to this fourth iteration of the Embodying Histories seminar series. This series is funded by an AHRC Research Development and Engagement Fellowship grant. The aim of the series is to bring different researchers into dialogue, all of whom work with the past and histories and historical artifacts in different embodied ways. And if you've been to the previous sessions, you'll know we've had a variety of speakers from different backgrounds. I'm absolutely delighted on this occasion to welcome two speakers to speak to us today. So we have Webster B. McDonald, who's an assistant professor of theatre and performance studies at the University of Kansas. He's an artist, scholar, educator who theorizes Black, queer, Jamaican post-colonial subjectivity to unsettle normative cultural formations, including colonialism, anti-Blackness, and hegemonic masculinity. Webster's artistic and theory-infused work includes critical decolonial monodrama performance and the staging of archival documents. And he's currently working on a book project titled Archival Weight, Sexuality, Citizenship and the Performance of Black and Queer Life in Jamaica, which I hope we'll hear a little bit about in the context of this talk. Webster is going to be in conversation today with Ben Spatz. Ben Spatz needs no introduction to some of us, as their publications on embodied research have been influential, if not foundational, to the work of a wide range of researchers, including some of the previous speakers in this series. Ben is assistant professor in creative practice in the Department of Film and Creative Writing at the University of Birmingham in the UK. Ben's an interdisciplinary scholar practitioner focusing on critical approaches to embodied and artistic research and experiments in diasporic and decolonial Jewishness. They've written several books, including most recently Race and the Forms of Knowledge, which came out through Northwestern University Press in 2024. And they also founded the Videographic Journal of Embodied Research. So Ben and Webster today are going to speak about the notion of archival weight, unsettling archives, critical fabulation, and historically informed performance. The structure of today's session is going to be, they're going to give a brief introduction and then show a video followed by a dialogue about that, and then another video and then another dialogue. That will take us to about 5 o'clock, and then we'll have 30 minutes for open questions. So without any more blabber from me, I think I'll hand over to Ben and Webster. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
So yeah, I guess just as Emily said, we don't have a formal presentation structure today, and we don't have like slides, and we have things that we've been talking about over the last few years, and we did decide to structure it using a couple of videos. So these, I guess I'll just be super minimal in introducing the first video, just to say that it's from 2023. And it's from a time that Webster came over, and it's basically 5 minutes of a lab session, an embodied practice studio session. Also in it is Kate Holden, who was my PhD student at the time, works with queer vocal practices, now off doing her own teaching and research. And so that's who you see in the studio. I won't say any more at this moment, and then we can talk about kind of what's going on in the space. Okay, so yeah, here is the first clip, and let me know if the sound is not working, of course. Webster, do you want to say anything before I play this?
Uh, I guess what I was attempting to do here is to capture a section of my dissertation on the ways in which the lab uh, um, creates the conditions for archival weight. What is the weight of David Thomas Myers, who was executed in 1812? How might performance sort of offload that particular weight? And we'll get more into that, Ben, but I think it's okay to share it right now.
Great.
The last dying words, behavior, and confession. was executed at Peterborough on Monday, 4th of May, for an unnatural crime. The crime of this unfortunate man has become so much frequented of late that although the laws of this country are left open to mercy and have been extended to some, mercy has been extended to some, and yet in this instance been thought necessary to make a public example. At the fatal tree upon this miserable man, from a confession he made before his execution that he hoped those who had been partakers with him in these crimes might be brought to true repentance. D.T. Myers has been a tradesman at Peterborough near Stanford in an opulent way of considerable property and has left a family perhaps not to lament his lots but to explore the crimes of their father, in which fight of the world and of God is of most heinous nature. The underneath written account and confession of this crime for which he suffered, we will give in his own handwriting, 2 days before his execution. The underneath written account and confession of the crime for which he suffered as I believe that persons in my unhappy situation are expected to say something at the place of execution.
Yeah, I'm following a seminar.
We'll talk later.
Yeah, thank you.
I shall not be able to do it. I wish these, my dying words, to be made as public as possible. I confess that I am guilty of the crime for which I am compelled to suffer, and for these and all my sins, I desire to repent before God with a broken and contrite heart. I forgive from the bottom of my soul everyone that has wronged me, and I earnestly pray to the Almighty God that my untimely end may be a warning to others who are walking in the same path.
Do you want to give us some context from your slide?
Sure. So in archival weight, I am really interested in capturing the idea that the homosexual body carries a particular sensation. The homosexual body carries a particular a particular knowledge that is constantly summoned to be put down. In the case of David Thomas Myers, when I went to the UK in, was that in 2023, Ben, or 2020?
Yeah.
2023, my role was to sort of tarry in the archive, this idea of tarrying in the archive to find something that might bring David Thomas Myers to life. At the time, the only thing that I had access to was his last dying words that he sort of wrote to be made as public as possible. So that would have tied Myers to the event of execution, and that's one. And then I also had access to the sodomy statute that was created in 1533. And we had a location that he was located in Peterborough. He was executed in Peterborough. But apart from that, his representation in the archive was quite little. It was very little. So then the lab created almost like an incubator that extends his life, or sort of create a sort of thick description of his life. And then through this particular video, the enlisting, or sort of, I don't want to call it manipulation, but it sort of felt like a kind of manipulation, because I brought in a particular kind of directorial particularity, because I wanted you, Ben, to capture almost like the physical and vocal idiosyncrasies of Henry VIII, who created the Buckley Act, and then sort of enlisting Kate as the container for David Thomas Myers as he's there waiting for this kind of trial. So for greater context, then I am thinking about what might performance do with the archive? What might performance take from the archive? So we take a body that is sort of summoned to be put down through this idea of execution. But then the performance also denies the archive's logic of execution, archive's logic of spatial tactic or spatial stabilization. So whilst the body of Myers was executed through performance, there's a different kind of body that starts to arise. A body that might not entirely be Myers, but what might that do for the contemporary moment where the homosexual body, especially in a Jamaican context, remains a body to be summoned, to be put down, remains a kind of body to be seen, to be unseen.
I'd like to say something about the lab itself and kind of what's going on there, or what the context is. And I think in a sense I think it's very important to understand the structure, but also it isn't, which is why we started with the video. Like you can see things happening in the space, and in certain sense, it's almost particularly if you know that Webster's the one who's holding the camera, and if you know that Webster's in a kind of directorial role, as was just indicated. In a sense, that's, on a surface level, that's kind of all you'd need to know. Like, there's obviously two performers. If you know that Webster gave us a text, and the text was written on a piece of paper, and we're both holding a copy of the piece of paper, you know that Webster has given us some directions at some point, although that's not in what we just saw. And there we are. And in a sense, it's like a very obvious kind of, oh, it's performance, right? But I also want to say a little bit about how I understand that lab structure, because certainly in terms of what I was doing in that space, it's not at all, let's say, what I did in an early part of my life when I was an actor and someone gave me a text. It's a very different situation. Some people might know this if they looked at my work, but apologies to that. I want to describe it. So this idea of a lab, of a certain kind of lab, because lab is a very common and very flexible word. There's a lot of different kinds of labs. Every university now has a million labs, and now there's a lot of performance labs and a lot of humanities labs. So in this case, there's something very specific going on, although I would probably put a question mark over the extent to which it's going on, but certainly was going on for me, is that like about 10 years ago, 10 years, almost 10 years ago now, and even dating back 10 years before that, so almost 20 years ago now, I started to try to develop, following a very kind of adapted version of Polish Jerzy Grotowski's work, a way of basically how to dwell in the space of performing arts without making works. How to really put forward the research dimension of performing arts, and for me that meant a kind of indefinite postponement of the idea of the work, the performing work, and even the performance itself as the work. So as you might have in like a kind of improvisation setting or live art, that you'd have the performance itself is the work, but even that being set aside, and to just say what are we actually doing in the spaces of performance if we suspend this notion of the work. So what came out of that is a very specific methodology eventually, and even a method which has two key elements, which I'll just try to gloss very briefly. The first one is that what is going on in the space is the relationships of different kinds of roles that we have in the space. And again, in a certain way, this is really obvious, but like there are, let's say, there's performers, and the performers might have some material, for example, a text. There might be someone who is a director, or that person might be a choreographer, something like that. But there's someone who's giving direction from outside the performance. And there might be other kinds of relations. There's relationships of a performer with the material, but also between performers, there's relationships. So those relationships. So to say really like that's what's happening in the space. If we make a work, maybe that, that's a kind of secondary thing, who knows? But really what's going on is those relationships. And then the second aspect of the methodology is that one of those relations becomes video, and video is introduced as one of the relations. So that means this video is recorded not in a static camera, and not by an external videographer, but actually by the same person who in that moment is in the director role, which is not always true. So you can configure those roles in different ways. So that's what, was the sort of the frame, in the sense that Webster was coming and visiting my institution at that time, which was Huddersfield, University of Huddersfield. Kate and I had worked together in under that auspice of this kind of lab structure, but only a little bit, I would say. And this then Webster was visiting, and this was the second day that we were in the studio together. So I think I'm putting all of that under a kind of question mark because it's not the case that we really were working over a lot of time using these roles and kind of refining them. So I think, it's perfectly true that this idea of the lab was mostly what was occupying me. But I do think that that vocabulary of the lab is really important for me to understand and approach what Webster is talking about. Because you were just talking about, like, you brought this text, but it's not just a text. You brought a whole research project. You had been in archives. There's a whole kind of, it was a massive research project with an archival dimension. And it's coming through you into the studio. And in this video that we just watched, you were in this director role. You gave us these texts. And I'm really interested in this question of what the performer, what I was doing in that role, does with this text, which clearly does carry weight in that sense. And 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 yet I know that I don't know. I know that I don't know the archive that you were in. I know that I don't know most of what you're thinking about the text when you brought it in. I think I know a little bit more now, but even now I probably don't know the whole of it. But I do know more now than I knew then. At that time, it was really like quite a, it's quite introducing materials. And the other thing I should say is that you also gave us a gesture, or I guess it was more of I don't know if it was a gesture or a shape. You gave us this kind of shape that was a lunge with the arm up and back. And I, as part of my, but this is part of my understanding of the lab, is like I perceived it as a certain kind of shape, but it's a shape that's not really attainable for me because we have very different bodies and different trainings. And my training is more about action than about shape. And so I'm taking that shape that I saw and I'm kind of like, how could I approach this? And I want to be fluid around it, but I also want to go towards it. And so that's what's ending up with this kind of gestural action where I'm like, what can I access that? So my training is interfacing with with both of the materials that you gave me. I mean, similarly, you gave me the text, and I think I could have read the text, but I guess I was more pulled by the gesture maybe. And so the text ended up being incorporated physically rather than in a reading. But all of these things are in a sense, I'm not sure what to call them because they're not random. I mean, they're obviously all there because we decided to come into this space together. So it's not random at all, right? There's the mutual like let's do something together. It's the opposite of random, but it's also not planned because I had no idea about any of those things.
Right. I think the word spiritual possession was something that I used quite frequently in writing. I needed to be sort of possessed by the archive first, and in this case, David Thomas Myers' archive, and then it is the possession that gave birth to a series of gestures. I remember this being one. I remember I don't know, it's a complex kind of position in another gesture because I wanted enactment or reenactment to be an uncomfortable physical position. So there's the possession first within my body. And of course, in a way, I wanted something very specific. And I think that also went against the terms of the lab because one of the beauties of the lab is that while I might have a particular research question, then the way that you're responding to the work, the way that Kate is responding to the work has very little bearing on how it arrives as a kind of knowledge outcome. You're there sort of tapping into the realm of the text whilst being given direction, and almost felt as if at one point, and this is what we're not seeing in the video. At one point, I placed the camera down and I entered the space because I felt as if I wasn't getting the kind of embodiment that I wanted. And that is the baggage. That is sort of the baggage that comes with directing. The notion that the director has all the power to generate thought or generate meaning. But there's also something to be said about witnessing, that both players were witnessing the work for the first time in a way. But witnessing was also a point of subjectivity. There was a point of subjectivity that started to arise from this is the context, this is Myers, this is Henry VIII, and this is what we have. At some point, each player had to become a witness to the work. And by becoming a witness to the work, the embodiment, because this wasn't a performance per se, because we didn't have a traditional kind of audience per se, but the embodiment of the text would have taken its own kind of shape when each body sort of gave way to an act of witnessing. And I'm almost thinking that there was a kind of witnessing also to oneself, to the work, as you sort of try to make sense of the particularities of these ideas. But then witnessing also arrived from the position of the researcher. I was witnessing the emergence or the sort of archival performance of these two main subjects of study. And so it needed to also arrive as something that is intelligible to me that then became a useful part of my research outcomes. And it did. It did work for me because even that moment where you were cutting through the page, then there was a moment where it's almost as if, to me as a witness, the cutting through the page was a sort of transversal cutting through history, the history that was then and the history that continues to bear fruit in the present. Yeah.
Yeah, this is so it's really I'm really enjoying speaking in terms of like where I'm sort of speaking about what I think of as the methodology and hearing because your framing of it is really different in a certain way. It's like when you said the researcher. So I'm thinking about like who is the researcher in this space? Like for me, we're all doing different research projects, yeah? But there's the question of power that you mentioned is so central. All of this comes for me out of the experience of wanting to be a performer, but not wanting to accept the power dynamics that exist, which are also gendered and racialized power dynamics that exist in performing art spaces in general. Whereas you said the director role, particularly in theater, but it happens also in dance music, that there's this role that's kind of like that as if that person is the researcher really is what it comes down to in a research context in a practice research artistic research the idea is that that person's the researcher and the idea is that the other people are serving that researcher and I always felt like wait I want to be the researcher but that doesn't mean I want to leave the space that's my core kind of my starting points like I don't to be the researcher doesn't mean that you right, this is a profound methodological point. To be the researcher doesn't mean you have to stop moving, right? Why would it be that the person who goes and sits down and is outside the space, that's the researcher? And like, because the whole point is that the people in the space are researching. So if I look at this video that we just watched, like, and again, thinking about this idea that it's not random at all, but it's unpredicted, I'm doing a research project there that's very, like, when I watch it now, so one of the things about, just to say again about that methodology is that because the videographer role is inside the lab, you end up with this video material like this, which nobody, it's not a shooting of a work. It's not, there's nothing, it's a moment of improvisation, but the videography is also improvised. It's equally improvised. And so what is going on in the video? So you were just talking about some of the things that you see in there, particularly in relation to the text and the cutting of the text. This kind of which clearly like there's a gesture there, there's an action, something that was happening, and the text was ripped. So if I think about my research project, and some of the like in the book that Emily mentioned, like there's a core concept of white writing as kind of a crucial, drawing on work in Indigenous studies and critical Black studies about the centrality of alphabetic language, written language, knowledge production as part of coloniality and colonialism. And trying to articulate the extent to which that form of writing is still massively dominant, whether we're talking about law, or we're talking about finance, or we're talking about what is an institution, right? Like to have an institution, well, first have a founding statement, and the statement has to be written in a certain way. It can't be a poem, can't be a song, you can't have a dance, can't be like, here's our university, the founding document is this dance. You're not allowed to do that in this white supremacist colonial situation. It has to be a certain kind of writing. So to me, when I look at that, I'm saying, oh yeah, you gave me this text, and I was like, I'm not going to read this text. I'm not going to read this out loud. I'm going to, I mean, essentially, kind of fight it. Like, there's a certain martial quality where I'm like, I'm gonna go towards this text in an intense way until it disappears, until it breaks in some way. So to me, it's kind of, one of the things about this video, this type of video coming out of this type of lab is that, so one of the things I've done with some other material is I've often made a lot of video essays about it, right? That's part of the process. So if I were to make a video essay with this clip, it would be about white writing, it would be about embodiment and a sort of a need to marshal the force to cut through the sheet of white writing that has been given to me in the role of actor. That's like, here's your text, actor, and it's like, oh, that's my text. So yeah.
But there's also a thickness to it. I mean, this is just what, 20 minutes? But there's a thickness that starts to arise because whilst I assumed the role of, let's call it the researcher in this particular moment, you were also researching by way of witnessing the text. But then my sort of question then was, because we're not held accountable or sort of held responsible for how the work emerges as thought, as ontology, as epistemology, do we sort of do I deny you a sort of stake in the work? Do I deny Kate a stake in the work? Because here I am interpreting your reception, or your sort of embodiment of these pieces of text from a place that works for me. So my viewership and my reception to the work is very, very particular. I'm looking for something very, very specific, but within the writing up of it, or the turning of the rich data or the thick data into something that is intelligible, that can be disseminated as thought, do I deny you both a stake in the interpretation and articulation of the work? And maybe that doesn't matter in the lab. I don't know.
I don't feel any space is denied. I mean, the thing that I love about the way that video comes out of this kind of process, which is really different from how video of performance documentation is usually made. Because usually, if you have a performance and it's called, Hamlet or whatever, then you make a video of it, then you call the video Hamlet. And it's like it's all kind of stacked. The meaning and the power is all stacked. Like here's a video of the thing that this person directed. Whereas in this case, no, I can just as easily make a video. There are other situations of other lab videos where I've made a video and someone else has made a video, like a video essay of the same material in a different frame. So to me, it's like, it's quite a, I don't really like to use the word data because I think that's too reductive, but there is that quality of openness,
Right.
where openness to interpretation, where like you can put this in your research and frame it in a certain way because it's all true, and then I could put it somewhere and frame it another way. I think we should play the other clip, so just to say about the other clip. So the other clip is from a session, I mean, it's the same day, but it's a bit later, and Kate is in the role of outside eye slash director slash facilitator slash witness. So it's you and me in the space, and there's no more text. I don't know what Kate said, but there's no intervention in the video. So it's really you and me. So it's a completely different thing. But shall I play that now?
Yes, yes, yes. Go for it.
Sweet delivery, life Feel human love.
I'd like to invite you in the remaining time to
Can I just start by saying that each time that I watch this video, I discover so many new ideas, new thought. And I guess one is that how much this is the first time that we would have been experimenting together, and how much we were able to listen. I don't know. Well, at least I felt as if we were listening to each other, we were reacting to each other. Um, and maybe you could speak a little about, because this is what I'm thinking about right now. I had questions planned, but this is what I'm thinking about right now, this idea of, is there something about a beautiful kind of transgression, perversity, queerness that starts to arrive as you're watching? Um, Maybe let's start there as an opener before I sort of get into some of the more complicated questions.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, there I find yeah, it's so dense in a way. And I think I guess it's hard to know where to begin, but I guess one thing I want to say is the video is dense also because our relationship is ongoing.
Right.
It's like it's not that's important because I think if you sometimes this kind of practice could be confused with like if you just came together and did a dance improvisation and went away, I mean, it would still have a lot of that density, actually. It would still have, I guess I'm interested in the relationship between those two things. So if we could come together and do an improvisation, movement, performance, voice improvisation, and make a video of it, and it might still have some of those qualities. And certainly we knew each other less then than we do now. So it might still have some of those qualities. I mean, it would. We'd still have, because a lot of that is the kind of the embodied knowledge, whether it's from a professional training or from other places. Like there's kind of movement work and there's voice work and there's contact. Um, but it's also it's I mean certainly I wouldn't if I didn't still have relation with you now, and if we weren't still now even developing new projects, I would be very cautious about going back to the video, like you were saying a moment ago, and trying to say what it's about.
Right.
because I would say, well, I don't know what it's about. I mean, I don't know. I would hesitate to even begin to label anything. I guess that's what I want to say. Like I was thinking, I asked you the other day, like, are there any men in this video? I'm wondering because I'm
Right.
thinking maybe not. So that goes to also what you were saying, but like um someone could watch the video and because someone can watch the video and say like, oh, it's two men, and no. so so
Right.
so that's I have a real hesitance about how to label it. I mean, so I'm kind of like, yeah, it could be. It's this question of aboutness, like queerness. It can be about queerness. Yes, yes. And then once you say that, once you in the conversation around it, once you say, what if it were about queerness? Or, thinking about this idea of making video essays. What if one wanted to make it into a video essay and the title was queerness? Because I have other video essays that are called different things. I have a video essay called Ancestors. I have a video essay called Whiteness. I have a video essay called um, other things. And with those titles, you put something on it. But I don't think it's to say, I mean, to me, it's never to say, it's not to close off other interpretations. It's not to say that's what it's about, and so it's not about something else. It's about so many things. But if one were to say this is queerness, we're going to unpack this through queerness. So then what kind of framing would we give it? What texts might we put onto it? What sources might we cite, putting, because I like to put text onto it, or if someone could do a voiceover if they wanted, or put a text before the video appears and a little explanatory text. But even the title, just the title, just if you just call it queerness, everything is, it's a totally different video than if you call it something else.
But then it also brings the question of race. I mean, Kate wasn't specific. I don't remember the prompt. I can't remember the prompt that
There doesn't have to have been a prompt because for me, I mean, in that role, and I think I had already worked with Kate in a bit,
Mhm.
the director role is director witness, and everything starts from the practitioner. So the director is not obligated to say anything ever in the whole session. Like that role for me can simply witness the entire time. The phrase, if we go back to Grotowski, is if he said something, he wrote, if something like, if the actor is doing, and if it matters to them, even if I don't understand, I have to watch. That's the job. It's like you have to watch. You have to see what this person is doing that matters to them. So there may not have been a prompt, or there may have been a prompt. I don't know.
Right. But then this is a clear black body beside a white body. And now that this is also a part of this seminar space, do we vacate, does the lab vacate race in that particular moment so that it can be addressed later? Or is there a way in which that race can also be addressed within this moment of exploration?
Do you mean was it addressed then, or do you mean could we address it now in relation to the video?
Could we address it now in relation to the video? And that is one thing. But it didn't occur to me that it could have been discussed also there in that particular moment. But for some reason, in that particular moment, I mean, race was clearly evident, but it wasn't a part of the reason why, of course, we were gathering. But how do you then address, I guess, the ways in which bodies are racialized in the space of the lab?
I mean, I think for me it certainly was present, and I wouldn't say it wasn't part of the reason that we were gathering necessarily. It's a sort of, I mean, I was certainly probably less. No, I mean, I think at that moment I was very much in the place that I am now in terms of because like the video essay that I mentioned, which is called Whiteness, I had already made that, and so that's a video where there's a lab space, and indeed race is not being discussed explicitly in that lab in the space that video is about. But then I'm coming back to the video and saying, this is some material that I think I can use to talk about how I'm understanding whiteness in this moment. And
Mhm.
it's not, I mean, in that video and in my thinking about how race is present in the lab, it's certainly not only bodies that are racialized. So, like the lab itself, very much, and it's a white box space, so it's even more. But even a black box is also, quote unquote, black box is also like that. It's a university. It's a university in the UK. Um, it's this notion of the performance space as an emptied room where everything is taken out and it's rectangular, and all of that is racialized for me. So the lab, it's the physical space is racialized, and also in the whiteness video, there's a book. It's The Open by Giorgio Agamben, and that is very much also part of what's activating me to say whiteness is at stake here. I think. Yeah, I guess maybe that's my first answer is like when I'm thinking about how race is present in the lab, I'm wanting to transect or intersect the bodies with what I understand as the other racialized structures, like the building that we're in, the institution that's supporting us, and then objects like books or texts that are coming into the space as well. Not to exclude the racialization of the bodies, but to kind of address it on these multiple levels. What do you think of that?
I mean, certainly for me, it race didn't start to arise until I had moments to sit with it. To be honest, um, and I mean, the ways in which this particular video emerged also came from um, it came from Kate, who is also a white body, a white presence in the space, who wasn't thinking about race in that particular. And I am sort of struggling with one, the intimacy created between the bodies in the space, and it's a small scale kind of lab creation. It's a small scale. And maybe in that particular moment, these are two white bodies against a black body in a particular space. And this is not to make this complex. This is not to make this about race, but I'm trying to understand how might this center race, but also decenter it in ways that we aren't cognizant of. And maybe that's not what the lab is about in that particular moment. But then, as I touch on scale too, could this could this have worked in a larger scale? What if we had 30 bodies or 15 bodies in the studio? Could this also work in the way that the intimacies form between the history, the director, the practitioner?
I mean, I guess I think I want to say that for me, race is always present in the sense that and I think this was also true in 23. It's a few years ago, but I was very much in this approach that like, my assumption is that race is an analytic frame for understanding the whole structuring of the world that we live in, and specifically the structure of modernity, quote unquote, let's say 1492. Um, and so to me, it's like the building is racialized and the floor is racialized, the lighting, the steel grids are racialized. And then within that, I'm racialized. And we have this encounter. And so, I mean, there's one question which is like, so I guess it's not a question to me of whether it's present, but whether how one would analyze it. So if one wanted to make the video essay about that, then what does one see going on there? I mean, so then going back to queerness, we could say, well, we see that there's an embodied relation. There's a lot of gentleness. There's a lot of care and holding and kind of exploring. There's a touching of hands, touching of voices that is, happening within this space. And yeah, I think you're pointing to maybe the ways in which that plays with, but is also in tension with, I would say, to me, not only difference in how we're visually presenting and appearing on the screen, which is also, not the same as how we are or that's not the completion of how we're racialized. All of my work on thinking through Jewishness is precisely about understanding how the history of racialization changes what is understood also to be visible. Like it's not just a question of a racial identification that's not visible. It's rather a question of what counts as visible, like, things that visual things that used to be racialized as non-white and now are racialized as white, but they're still visible. So those kinds of things, like those are all there, and so is the building, and so is the kind of institutional structure. So I think I would say all of that is at play in that kind of analysis.
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm
I
just
wanted to say something about the 30 people. Right. I mean, I
yeah.
like I like the micro version because to me, particularly if we go towards this kind of thing where we're trying to, to have this conversation, like in this space, which is a very similar, I mean, we're in the same institutional space, I would say here. Um, when we go towards this, I want to be able to have this kind of conversation. I think I want to be able to unpack in detail. And I guess it depends who the 30 people were. But I think it would be a whole other thing to have 30 people in terms of the question of who gets to say what it's about.
Right.
Because I mean, I've been trying for years to figure out a way to expand it. But what's amazing about our relationship to me in this context is like we're both researchers and we have an ongoing relationship. So we're both still interpreting what's going on. The hard part about doing some kind of public event I've always found is like you bring people together. It's very easy to bring people together and have something interesting happen and make a video of it. What is impossible is to have an ongoing conversation afterwards that's meaningful where everyone gets to see the video and then everyone gets to like edit the video or talk about the video or something where everyone gets to watch and everyone gets to say what they think was happening. That's really hard.
Yeah. Because I've been trying to do something of the same effect with Christian, who's also here in a movement class to sort of create that dynamic configuration. And I don't know, it works to some degree because the studio space emerges as a kind of intimate space. It's a sacred space. So I think what we have done is to establish the parameters. I think the establishment of the parameters helped in garnering what each practitioner, what each director is sort of trying to play with. I think it's possible, but I think the outcome might be different because I just think that the intimacy that was created between the three of us, I don't think that can be replicated in a broader scale. It's possible, but I think it would take more time for people to get on board with also this idea of agency, this idea of subjectivity. You're telling me that, oh, I can interpret this however I want to interpret this without being tied to how you're interpreting this. Oh, okay. I can try. I can try to do that. But there is still that baggage of being relied on for meaning, and I think that's how the lab also exists as something that dehistoricizes that baggage to say that we each have an ability to have agency. There's a question, were you all informed of the context of history?
Yeah, there's a couple questions. Oh, was there
Oh,
another? There was another question before. It seems to have gone away. Okay. Should we
uh,
should we take on the question? Because it's a good moment. Yeah.
yeah, let's but there was another question there to think about time. I don't remember. I don't recall the question. Uh Cheyenne asks, were you all informed of the context history before starting? And if you were, do you think and experience history and its weight in the same way during and if not, did you discuss it afterwards? And what was that discussion like? That's a terrific question. Um, maybe I could start and then you chime in, Ben. So one, I was the only one who had, I guess, the context coming into it. I mean, there was a moment before we started to experiment where I think we decided on 20-minute chunks of expiration, and that was one context. Um, Two, I was going to assume the role of director, researcher, provocateur, if you want to call it that. And then Kate and Ben, you were going to be practitioners of some sort. But apart from that, I had the initial context of one, this is David Thomas Myers' last dying words, and my idea was to bring that particular historical moment to life in the studio. But I can't speak on whether or not we had the same weight. It's probably obvious that we don't have the same weight because my weight was coming from being possessed by the text. So by witnessing these bodies in the space, I was seeing Myers, I was seeing Henry, I was seeing history taking shape for me because that was what I was looking for when I brought these pieces to the studio. Ben, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's really important that we all have different relations to what's going on, but like in a really fundamental way. Like I think I hear what you're saying, and I think what you were just talking now about the first session. But we also played the second session, and I think so. I'll go back to what I said in the beginning when I introduced the lab. For me, what's going on is the relationships in the room. That's what's going on. Is like we're there together, and maybe I'm dematerializing things that I shouldn't be dematerializing, like what other presences are in the room. But I mean everything that's in the room, really. But that's what's going on. So it's almost like I want to start from saying like there's nothing that it's about. There's no way that we could possibly all agree on what it's about. Even if we say we're all going to research David Myers or we're all going to research Hamlet or we're all going to, look at mushrooms or whatever it is, not only do we have totally different relationships to those things, but we also um, have other things going on. So like I think very clearly you brought in that text. So you had the deepest, heaviest, the most weight in relation to that text. But what I was saying before was that I have quite um I think I had a quite weighted reaction to the experience of being given a text, a piece of white paper with black writing on it that was printed extra large so it was as if it was a monologue. That's something that I grew up with. Like, here's your monologue. And what does that mean? Like, you should memorize the monologue. You should know what the words mean. Then you might approach it in terms of beats or action verbs, like this whole technology of like, here's a text, right? And then me kind of receiving that and saying, wait a minute, I've spent 20 years getting away from that. I'm not going to treat this as a monologue. I'm going to treat it as a piece of paper. I'm going to do something physically with the piece of paper. So there is weight there. There's a research project, and Kate has her own research project. I'm not going to speak for Kate, but like there's a whole research project there about queer ghosting, voicing, related to Roy Hart work and other sources. And so that project is there. And if Kate were speaking now, there would be a whole other perspective on what was happening in the room. What did the voices mean? What did the text mean? Right? So I think that it's that complexity that's important. And to answer the last part, did you discuss it afterwards? And what was that discussion like? This is the discussion. And
Right.
that's why I love the video relation is that we can come back 3 years later and Webster chose these two clips from the larger body and say, what do we think was going on in that moment? And if we come back again in 3 years later, we're going to have a different conversation.
Right. Because I'm thinking about writing an essay based on even this conversation too, because there's so many new things that are starting to arise. Um, but I also grew from then. I think I grew also as an intellectual subject from then. So there's so many ideas that are emerging, even as I write this book. There's another question.
Yeah,
I'm going to read it out.
please.
It seems like Ben is interested in the methodology of performance. Performers are researchers as well as the director, archivist, etc. But Webster, what was your larger project beyond bringing that particular execution moment to life in the studio? Were you accumulating lots of historical examples like Myers' execution to think about something larger? Ooh. And can you talk a bit about the historical specificity of your reperformance? If you're talking about an execution of a gay woman from 19th century China, would the same performance prompts have been given to the researchers? Did you even need to go to the early modern archive to extract this text for performance? Did the conditions of its archive matter? And they're in a classroom. So there's so this is a lot. There's so many questions here to answer. Um, hmm. So one, space was very important to me. I mean, I could have accessed Thomas Myers's archive from anywhere in the world, but there's something quite peculiar about being present in the UK, to become one with the space. I like this idea of the specificity of spatial geography. And if anyone who knows anything also about Jamaica's history, that Britain would have colonized Jamaica from 1655 to 1962. So it's quite important for me to also be present in the space, to be sort of affected by the space that is the UK. But for the larger project, archival weight is a structural logic that might attend to the ways in which history is no longer just static. History is no longer just written, but history is no longer embedded in some kind of domicile. It's no longer kept in museums or libraries, but it's now a part of our bodies. So even the notion surrounding the archive as a logic of weight or declivity is something that bodies are made to carry. And so to the question of could an equal kind of weight be given to a queer woman who is executed in China? Definitely. The main purpose of archival weight is that an emphasis on the body's relationship to the state, or the state's production of a body to be put down to maintain this notion of a normative body politic, is a logic that can be applied to not just queer people. But if you want to bring even a Gamben's, not a Gamben, but Mbembe's notion of the necropolitical management of bodies, then archival weight is very much in conversation there, because not only queer bodies are being made to arrive to be put down, but there are many racialized bodies. Black bodies, for example, have been racialized and are caught, are sort of brought into being to be put down. So it was important for me to, one, be in the space, the UK space, to allow the space to take shape in the body, and then use that as a kind of logic for the phenomenology surrounding space. Ben, do you want to speak maybe a little to the idea of, because I'm also very much interested in the idea of the role between the archivist and the researcher, but also the practitioner as archive, because that's exactly what I wanted to do through these texts. I wanted to make these texts manifest through performance, through enlisting your bodies per se.
Yeah, I think I want to say something about the content of my own embodied research because I think it's true, certainly in this conversation and also more broadly, that I have foregrounded methodology. And I think there are lots of reasons why I've done that. One of them is that I think the work that for me feels like the core embodied research, which is, I call it crypto-Judaica. I say that it's about Jewishness. It's very much about queerness and non-binary gender, and kink as much as it is about Jewishness. So I don't, people sometimes don't. I think one doesn't necessarily assume that that's the case if one says Jewishness, but that's where the embodied research is located for me. And as I think we most of us know, the university is not a safe space for that kind of research. You don't just come in and do queer, kinky, non-binary, Jewish, decolonial Jewish, anti-Zionist research in the university. So I lead with methodology to create spaces where that work can be done. That's the reason why I've developed the lab methodology and the Journal of Embodied Research and that kind of thing. But it is, I mean, while I've been mostly talking about methodology, and while, I think what Webster is bringing and brought to that first session in terms of that particular research project is really important to foreground, my embodied research on like queer decolonial Jewishness is totally present throughout both of the sessions. There's no practice that I'm doing that is not about queer decolonial Jewishness in that sense. I mean, in the first one, again, there's a sort of martial relation to textuality. There's a martial relation to the idea of being directed by given a monologue, that kind of thing. And there's a response to a sort of a very virtuosic shaped performance with my own kind of like my own virtuosity, which is not shape in the same sense. I don't have the length, I don't have the flexibility, but I have an embodied integration that is well trained that can produce that kind of gesture with that kind of force. And in the second one, maybe more obviously, there is that queerness, there's the gentleness, there's the care, there's the relationship of the voice to the action, to the physical movement and the voice. So I would say, yeah, it's not that I'm less interested in that. It's more that I don't lead with it for both reasons. Both because I lead with the methodology to create space for my own embodied research, but also for others, for whatever Webster wants to do and for whatever Kate wants to do. Like the spaces need to be, if the space can hold these kind of vulnerable things that I want to do, then it will also maybe hold the vulnerable things that other people want to be able to do and should be able to do in the university.
Right. Oof. Lauren is another question.
Yeah. Shall I read? There's a couple. So Lauren responded and then Christian asked a question. I can read these.
Yes.
Okay, Lauren said, "This is so helpful." This is coming back to the previous one. "This is so helpful. Thank you. Is the identity of the performer and its alignment or partial alignment with the identity of the historical subject important? Then, is it a specific practitioner's body? Is a specific practitioner's body an archive of all history, or only specific histories? For example, as a heterosexual white Jewish woman, can I access the archive of a queer black man? Can I say something about it? So
Go
it's
for
not gonna be yes or no. Oh,
it.
it's not gonna be yes or no. Let me hug everyone. Like it's not gonna be yes or no. It's not gonna be either, the identities don't matter, just do whatever you feel like. It's also not gonna be, hey, stop, don't do anything, right? It's gonna all be how. It's all gonna be how. It's all gonna be what I call technique. We could call it dramaturgy. We could call it weight. Like it's all gonna be how do we go towards the different things? And so, of course, it does matter. Of course, it's important. That's the only thing that's important. The only thing that's happening in the lab is the relationship between, what did we say here? The relationship between the identity of the performer, which includes all their knowledge, and the identity of the historical topic or subject, which includes all their knowledge. Like, that's what's happening. So, it's the only important, that's what is happening. And so, um, yes, but it's not a yes or no. It's not that they're blocked and they can't connect, nor is it that they're the same. It's that that's what's going on, is that relationship. Yeah?
100%. I mean, this is also a very complex question too, because And I'm thinking about this from even a position of teaching in a predominantly white institution, and I'm moving ideas that are quite particular to critical Black studies, Black experiences. And I often get this question of then who gets to embody the particularities of maybe a Black archive, a Black queer archive, a Black Jamaican archive, which are quite different. Um, but the logic of archival weight is one that wants the practitioner, the student, the thinker, the mover to tarry within the interstices of these histories, to find where the weight might show up in your particular body. And that tarrying is something that is quite contemplative, it's spiritual, it demands an active participation in these histories. It really demands that. Um, can can a white body activate the particularities of a Black queer archive? No and yes. No and yes. Yes, because what if the archive or the archival weight that starts to arise through tarrying evokes something that might not be Black, but something that points to subjection, something that points to what does it mean to be a docile body that goes beyond race, gender, class, sexuality. So it's a yes and no question. Can a white body capture the idiosyncrasies of Blackness in a place that is authentic? Can the white body become Black? Can the Black body become white? Those are even more complex terrains. But if we think about archival weight as the waiting or the tarrying for that moment where one's identity or the particularities of one's identity find ways into the specificities of these histories of these cultural moments. I don't think it's impossible to understand the Black experience or the Black queer experience, but it demands an ethic of tarrying, waiting, laboring, wrestling, tussling. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
I guess that's what I'll say.
can I just expand on that, like, because it resonates so much with this point, which is I gotta say it, it's Grotowskian in my own background, which is duration of the practice. And thinking about what you were saying just now and what we were talking about before about pedagogy, and I said before it's not a yes or a no. So to put it in kind of pedagogical terms, of course you don't want to rush such a thing, because you don't want to go towards it and say, "Oh, I got it. I figured it out. Here we go. I'm going to do everything." Right? That's too much. It's too fast, and it's risky. You can do harm in that way. But I don't think it's better to say, um, "I'll never do that." Cross it off the list. I can't be in that role. I can't work with that archive. I can't have that text because then you've broken the relation. So it's like, if you feel that it's a challenge for whatever reason, if the approach is, it's like any relation, any embodied relation. If the approach is um, tender, sensitive, risky, go slow, take more time, do more preparation, which means, could also mean read more or have other conversations or do your own embodied preparation. But like, just do more. There's no rush to get there, but also I think that it doesn't help at all to put yourself in the position of the conventional scholar slash spectator, which is, and I'm not saying that those roles have to be like that, but this kind of external position of the scholar, spectator, director, who begins by saying, "I'll never enter the space," that particular role, to me, that's a methodological whiteness, and that blocks the relation.
Oof. There's another question. You want to read it, Ben,
Sure,
or
I'll
do
read
you?
it. Yeah. So Christian says, to the position that the lab disrupts identity, race, gender, ethnicity, spirituality, etc., how was the archival weight sharing in the UK lab? Seeing the session with you both, with Kate as videographer, I noticed many moments of corporeal and incorporeal weight sharing. But was this foregrounded before the work, or maybe a level of aftercare? How did archival weight move?
You take this one, Ben. You.
Okay. Well, I think there's again several strands going on in the question. First, I want to say I think the lab expresses as much as it disrupts identity, so I think there's potentialities to disrupt what we think of as these identities, but as everyone who knows me knows, I'm the, not against identity. I'm for identity. I think all politics is identity and all identity is political. So the
Right.
lab, we could, as much as we could say the lab disrupts identity, we can say the lab expresses identity. It's a place where, hopefully, race, gender, ethnicity, and spirituality can manifest and appear in the full sense of what Nicholas Mirzoff writes about Black Lives Matter, appear in a political sense. So then as to how it was in this lab, um, I mean, from my perspective, this lab was, I mean, it was small. It has a small duration. Webster only came for like a week, and we only had a couple of days in the lab, compared to the lab I did in 2017 with Eda Ercin and Agnieszka Mendel. That was a long lab, and even that was short. When it ended, it was like, no, it can't end. So it was very short and small. So I don't think to me, it wasn't particularly. I don't think it was super tender or risky. I think the real aftercare and the real deepening is happening now through the ongoing relationship, through the conversation now, through the projects that Webster and I are coming back to and seeing to see like we just have put out a call for a book, an edited book, which we should mention in this session. Get in touch if you're interested. We can say more about it. But just to say that while we're doing that kind of scholarly editing thing, to come back and see a moment of, as you said, weight sharing, corporeal, intercorporeal weight sharing, is really, I think, very meaningful in support of that.
I mean, I co-sign this, Ben, because I think that now we're doing I guess the aftercare, the after work, the postness of the video. Even before now. I mean, when I watched it yesterday, aftercare, this morning, aftercare, now aftercare. Um, but I wasn't even thinking about archival weight the way that I'm thinking about it now, as something that can be that the weight is something that can be seen, it can be felt. Um, One particular archival weight might activate a particular weight in another person that is not exactly the weight of the archive. Um, but I can definitely see the corporeality of weight sharing in so many moments, even when we were apart, because through touch, through the carefulness of touch, I think that brought us closer together. Because before that, we were sort of witnessing each other from a place of distance. We were distant, and then I think it was Kate who gave us a nudge to find ways to explore each other from a closer space. And I think that was a beautiful moment because the ways in which the weight sharing started to arrive there, we were in sync. Sound came, so sound text emerged, movement text emerged. Some sort of erotic text also started to emerge that I didn't see then. But thank you, Christian, for that question. Oof. All right,
You
there's
read
another one.
you read the next one.
I say we'll maybe make this the last question and then we'll wrap up. But I didn't want to
Yeah.
Okay. It seemed from the performance that you were working to conjure David Thomas Myers through his words, 100%, and the effective terrain that was contained by the moment in history, right, which have been silenced in white mainstream history. My question is about time. How does this embodied methodology change your understanding of time as connected to Myers' specific history? What does it mean to conjure Myers in these times? And does the video serve as a form of repetition for capturing this embodied and affective archive? Definitely, definitely. This is a terrific question. As I'm thinking about time, and I guess in my book, I frame this as a transversal tracing or sort of transversal transtemporal affectivity. I think that's how I framed it. Where I'm thinking about 1533 as time. I'm thinking about 1812 as that's the time when David Myers was executed. I'm thinking about the transplantation of the Buggery Act in Jamaica in somewhere around 1864 as that particular time. I'm thinking about how that is in tension with 1962 as an independent moment that should have off-centered or decentered that particular time, because bodies are still sort of held in place via this law. And it's not that the law itself is being imposed, but if you think about time as something that changes, the literality of the law might not deserve the kind of attention that people would have given it prior to independence. But not because bodies are policing themselves, bodies are executing themselves in this sort of necropolitical moment. It made me think about time as something that doesn't say the same, but they're sort of repeated in a fractal-like manner. So the law doesn't impose itself on bodies per se, because no, the law is a part of our bodies. So no, we're policing our bodies, and it's the same kind of execution, but in a lesser belligerent sense. And so the repetition then of David Thomas Myers was almost like a softened version of the literal violence. And there's a kind of queerness or sort of wake work that I was sort of trying to capture there, where I know of this as a very violent act, but performance makes the act a little more digestible. It makes the act a little more timely. It makes the act a little more timely. Um, yeah, I think I'm running out of time. But Ben, do you want to add something to that?
Just very briefly, nothing really from my own perspective, but to say that the power of the archive
Right.
is something that is constantly overwhelming. I'm thinking of the famous Walter Benjamin passage about the angel of history as the piling up of the archive that we have to deal with, that we cannot escape. And I want to kind of maybe mention Elizabeth Freeman's work on erotohistoriography. It's the book Time Binds. It's queer, and it's about that kind of, to have an erotic relationship to history and what would that look like. And in there is some analysis of like some queer and kinky black work by Isaac Julian in video form. And I think, yeah, I mean, it's never to say like video is some kind of magic thing that's going to save us or anything. Obviously not. But like there are some new possibilities that are unexplored. And the way that video has, often been used has been constrained by various economic factors and power structures. And so I think there is certainly in bringing video in as a research form and as an academic form, speaking to the academic understanding of what is knowledge and what is an archive, it has this potential to bring in this kind of eroto-historiographic practice in a different way.
Is that a good place to perhaps wrap up and say a huge thank you to both of you, to Webster and to Ben, for this really rich and a discussion I think we'll all be processing for a while. I've got pages full of notes here, but I love that we had so many really also thoughtful and provoking questions as well. And just, I mean, for me, the sense coming through of the ways of knowing that you're opening up through this work, and particularly as well that this shift from knowledge as a commodity, which it is in the university, to knowing as a practice and an embodied practice, and the archive as something that we process through our bodies and through our subjectivity, and something we can hand to each other. And yeah, it's just all, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. So yes, this talk, well, the recording of this will go online for anyone who wants to watch it again. I think I probably will. There is one more session in this series of seminars, which is on the 6th of May, which will be myself in conversation with Mira Benjamin around notions of technique in instrumental music performance, so particularly the relationship between experimental and historically orientated embodied musical research. So it'll be wonderful to see some of you at that as well. If you have enjoyed these sessions, please drop me a line. It's always really both wonderful but also practically useful to have evidence I can show the people with the purse strings what something is worth doing again. I hope you won't mind if I perhaps get in touch in future if I'm planning any similar events as well to people who've registered their details for the sessions. So a huge thank you once again to Webster and Ben.